out. Okay, so I will start and we'll go from there. So today I'm going to do the professor, and I was talking to Florin earlier about my issues with tying the professor. The first issue was finding reasonably good duck quill to make a really nice tail. And I had these goose quill things and they just kept falling apart. But at the sale last week, I managed to pick up a bag of these guys, which are goose quill, I think. And they're nice and stick and they hold together. So I found a tail product. The second thing was finding a body material. So I tied some up with conventional Danville's 4-strand floss. And that works. It's just a little tricky to get a nice smooth body out of it. So I have tried a couple with this stuff. It's a Vivus floss. It's a single strand and it's a little more lighter yellow color. So I'm going to use that today. And then tinsel was trying to get a good tinsel. I tried this stuff, which is the size 16 for the smaller flies. And that's the one I posted, which the damn stuff just it would not flip over for me. So what I've got is this stuff, which is a size 14, a little bigger. Get a fewer wraps on the body. And then, of course, the usual problem with these is the cotton pick and wing. And that's mallard flank. And it's not exactly easy to get a nice looking mallard flank wing, let me tell you. And I've tried several different methods of tying it on. I tried the David McPhail method of cutting the two slips off of opposite sides of the feather so they have the same curve, and then putting them side by side, holding them on the fly with your finger, and then folding them down and tying. And what I ended up when I tried that was this. So that was not too successful. So today I'm going to cheat. What I did is I took my two slips of mallard flank and put them on the workbench in front of me, evening up all the tails. And then I put a little dab of super glue on this and smushed it down. So these are glued together, and we'll see if that works. Dave,
show me a mallard feather, please.
Mallard feather. Oh, yes, I will do. The really good ones that I got. Well, let's show the. I got some of the slop here. No, I don't. I think I put that somewhere else.
Please.
Just a second. I got some somewhere. All right. Okay. So the typical stuff you get, the cheap mallard flank, which is this.
Okay.
It comes out of the bag, and it looks like that. And it's a little difficult to get because the tips of it are not even. You don't get really good wings out of that. So you have to sort through the whole damn bag to find some nice ones that have even tips on them. So I got these guys from Robinson's that are the select ones because they're paired up. They have a left one and a right one. And then when you get them, and I'll take them out here. So there's a pair, a left and a right, left and a right. So they have this, the curve is because you'll see there's a nice long, a good side, and then there's kind of a ragged tip side. And so if you use the good long side, you can only use one side of the feather. So you need two sides in order for the curves to mate. And that can be a bit of a pain in the patoot. So if this gluing method doesn't work, I'll show you the other one. The throat hackle is cheap hen hackle. And the trick with this is to find the right size to suit the fly that you're tying, which means for these smaller flies, I end up picking this hen neck down where there's not a lot of them left after doing a whole bunch of things. Because the hen hackle I'm showing you is the technique that all English wet flies use. It's called a folded hackle. So we'll do that. Thread, yellow 8/0. And we'll start with this is a size 8 hook so that you can see what I'm doing. You'd size these normally 10 and 12. So we'll start right behind, and eye width there's 2 behind the eye of the hook. And we'll do what the old guys call dress the hook, which is going from front to back in fairly close touching turns if possible. And you go all the way down to the bend of the hook, which is where the bend starts where the barb was, which I mashed down with my pliers. And then from that point, I'm just going to go in behind that, and I'm going to wrap just a little bit of a bump of thread. And the reason for that little bump, I'll take my thread right in front, and I'll just let it hang there. I'm going to use that bump to try and get the tail to stand up just a little bit. Tail is this red goose quill. And all I do is I cut a section off of it with my scissors. That's half a gap width of the hook. So that's a little thick. I might reduce that in size. And then I've got the matching feather, the opposite curve to the one that I just cut off, because you can see that there's a long side is one, long side the other. So I'm going to cut off this section off the other side, try and get the width about the same, and snip it right down there, pull it off, and by gum, that's pretty good. Now, I can't show you here because it's down on the workbench, is I'm going to take these things, flop them over so that the curved side is facing each other and the tip is the same shape, and hold them together like that. Now that is a little bit wide for this particular size of fly. So I'm going to take my bodkin and I'm going to narrow them down just a hair by picking out a couple of strands off of each of them so that they're about the same width. Just bear with me here a minute. So I've picked out a couple of strands and I've pulled them off. And I'll do the same off the other one. Just use my bodkin to loosen them up. And then you can see I can just take the 2 that I loosened up and pull them off. And then I'll match these guys up sitting on the workbench so that the curve of the feather and the point, the curve of the feather, one's curved up, one's curved down, and the point of the feathers lined up. And put them down on the workbench. Use my wet fingers to pick them up. And there we go, side by side, with the points going, the curve and the points going the same way. Now that the tail is roughly body length, a little bit less than shank length. So I'm going to hold that in my right hand to measure. Then I'll grab it with my left, finger to finger, and set that right down where the thread is, with the wing, the material parallel to the hook shank. Up in between my fingers, pinched down the other side, up in between my fingers, and then I pull up and let it just hang the far side. And the reason for doing that pull up is to try to keep that feather from wrapping around the hook. I want it to sit on top. So there it is, sitting on top. Now make sure, just scrunch around here, make sure. And you'll see that little bit of thread in behind it has caused it to tend up a little bit. And I want to keep the body even, so I'm just going to trim the tips off at the body length that I want. So just a few little bits here to trim. And I'll wrap my thread right up. Now this is red, so I'm going to want to cover that red up with some material. But before I put the body material on, I'll take my tinsel, and I'm not going to use my spool keeper because I'm going to use my the rotary version to do this tinsel nice. And the bob will get in the way. So what I do with the tinsel is, this is the typical mylar that comes that's silver on one side and gold on the other. So the way I work this is to make sure this gold side is in and the silver side is out. I put this down on the hook with the gold side facing me. And then I will wrap it down the hook shank to the point where and then I wrap back to where the tail was. And I don't want to get too tight to where the tail is. So what happens is, by having the gold side in and the silver side on the bottom, my first wrap is going to wrap it over. And that's the whole idea, is to wrap it over. Bring my thread back up to where that 2 eye widths behind the front. And I'm going to wrap over this single strand floss. And this is slippery stuff. So I'm going to take the tag, and instead of cutting it off, I'm going to pull it back. And then I'm going to wrap all the way down the hook shank. If I didn't do that, pull it back and then wrap down, it would pull out the first time I tried to wrap it up the hook shank. Bring my thread back up to the front. And this time I'm going to take my bobbin out of the way. So it's going to hold up here for the moment. And then I will do my usual, tie my little half hitch over the eye of the hook. That keeps it from unwrapping when I do the wrap of the body material. Put my bobbin rest there. Now I can manipulate this yellow stuff pretty well, actually. Underneath it here. And one of the nice things about these spool keepers is you can get it close, and you can twist or untwist the material as you wrap it. So you can see it goes nice and tight. And if I do it that way up, the body is going to be really well spun, and it'll be a little ribbed. So, but if I counter wrap my body, my spool thread here, turn it clockwise, that'll tend to flatten out that material. So you can see it's starting to flatten out a bit. And then I can overlay one wrap to another so that I don't get a ribbed body. Just counterclockwise again. Just a little wrap every once, counterclockwise turn on the spool. And I get a nice smooth body all the way up to just behind the eye. And here I can wrap that down, a couple of wraps behind, a couple of wraps in front. And then I can trim it off. Notice there's a little skiff of yellow here. I'm going to try and get rid of. There. Should have brought it. And then we'll take the, just make sure it's down really good. And I'll take my Griffin hackle pliers and grab this tinsel. And I will be careful with the first wrap because I want it to flip over. I want to make sure it flips over. And do it right at the back. And lo and behold, it did flip over. No, it didn't flip over. Darn. So there we go. I should be able to get it that way. There we are. So I can kind of force it to flip over so that it's now got the gold side in. And then I can wrap my spiral rib up with the silver side out. And I could try and evenly space them. And that's not bad. When I get to the front, I'll just wrap over the other one and a good snug wrap in between, and then a couple of wraps in front. And see, when I wrapped in front, I pushed it back a little bit. So that means that when I come down here and trim that off, there's no likelihood that that tinsel is going to unravel. Okay, now the next thing is our hen hackle. And I'm going to want something that is got a reasonable amount of the actual brown part of the hen. But I want the fibers to be maybe a gap length, maybe a little more than a gap length. So I'm picking all these ones that have fairly short feathers from the stem out. And I'll pull one of these guys out. And I will double check it by stroking back the feather barbules from the side of the hook, from the tip towards the back. And you can see if I look at these, they're the ones at the front are better than the ones at the back. They're skinny enough. And I will strip off the part I don't use off the stem by pulling backwards along the stem. And just to reveal the bare stem. I'm going to use this as a handle for wrapping. And what I want for the number of fibers, I don't need more than about 3 wraps. So about a gap width of that feather is about all I need. And I'm going to tie this in by the tip. So I turn it over so that the curved side is facing away from me. And I will put down where my thread is, right where the tinsel ended. And I will wrap over the tip like that. 1, 2, 3 good wraps. So you can see that's in nice and solid now. And then I will pull the tip that I was left over back and a wrap or 2 in front. And that locks the feather in. So I should be able to come in here and just snip that tip out. And if I'm gentle, but when I start wrapping the hackle, I won't pull the feather off the hook. A couple of good wraps. Now the trick with this folded hackle technique, and this is pretty typical for many English wet flies, is you hold it up like so with the curve facing back, wet your fingers and stroke backwards around the stem and see how that pulled all the feathers back in like a little row. And then as I wrap, I keep doing that. So particularly when I come underneath, I need to keep wrapping and stroking backwards. these feather bits. And I'll probably get 2, at most 3 wraps out of this. Then I'll hold my stem up and 1, 2, 3. And then I'll wrap in front. And then I can come in here and snip off the tip of the hackle. Wet my fingers again, and I will push down from the top. So most of these feathers, barbules, go down below the hook. A little bit of piddling around, I can get them all down below the hook. Wrap in there to get them in place. So now I've got my throat on this thing. Okay, here's the tricky part for me is always the wing. I got one little feather sticking up here. I'm going to clear out. So I want the wing to be not quite to the tail. So I'll measure that there, just a little bit ahead of the tail. And then I'll bring my right hand forward to where the eye is. And then where my thread is hanging is just in front of where I did the hackle. And at that point, I will grab the pair of wings glued together with my left hand and pinch nice and tight to the top of the hook shank. Do a loose wrap and pull up. Another loose wrap and pull up. And then I'll check it. There you go. There he is. He split again, even though they're glued, the little SOB split on me again. This is the frustrating part of tying mallard flank. So we'll try again. Just a little bit tighter back there. See if I can hold it in place. Okay, that's not so bad. Get a good wrap down towards the eye. And I will snip that off. So there's my wing. It's twisted a bit. I can probably straighten him up a bit. Or not. Now I tried Florin's methodology of doing the 2 together with the stem, and it did exactly the same thing. It just folded around the darn hook shank and split. Well, okay, that'll have to do. Now here's the other trick with this one I saw from another. These things typically have a black head. So all I do is I leave my yellow thread hang, get my black thread in here, start right behind the eye, and I will wrap backwards from the back. So I cover up all that yellow thread. And then when I get there, I will take the black and I will whip finish the black in front of all that stuff. Come on. Rats. Let's do it the other way. Out of there. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off both the yellow and the black tag. Then I can grab my whip finisher and I can finish the black head. Why are you being ornery today? Oh. You know, some days it's just a pain in the butt. There we go. Bit of that tag. Now I can whip finish. So that's him. He looks a little bit ragged because that wing did definitely not go the way I expected. So much for the glue idea. So the only other way that I've seen those done to make it really nice for those mallard flank wings is to take your mallard flank, and I'll do a bunch of this just to demonstrate, is to take the mallard flank and get yourself a good sized bunch right off the side of the hook. Line up the tips as best you can, pull it off the stem, and then roll it. Roll it all together. So we end up with what you see already, but it's instead of being nice and clean, it's kind of rolled. And then you can do that as a wing. And I think that's going to be a little easier to tie down, because it's not going to want to wrap around the hook shank. So that's the two methods for the wing, is to take a good sized chunk off and then just fold it and roll it together. So much for that. Okay, I will de-spotlight me. Okay. Florin, you're on. Okay. You have your audio muted.
Ah, yes, my audio. Okay. Thank you. Well, I didn't really have time to prepare a fancy thing. I had a bunch of ideas in my head and didn't really get around to doing a lot of practice flies and things. But here are the two ideas. One is a take on a fly by Dick Slobodian, which is his water boatman back swimmer. He ties those things on much bigger hooks, actually. This is a size 10 3906 hook, and that's, for me, that's almost as big as I would want to go. So it's a tan foam underbody, one of these strips of kind of crazy colored foam on the back. Now I found that mine has this stuff that gives it the color. It's kind of gooey and it sticks to everything. And so I got some of this anti-static cut in strips, and I'm using that as a over-the-top extra shiny bubble effect, and then just some silicone legs. So this was one of the ideas. The other idea came from the necessity to acquire some more Ziploc bags of the appropriate size for the fly swap. And so there, I ended up going to the dollar store to buy myself some of that stuff. And sure enough, I looked around the shelves a little bit. Right next to where the Ziploc bags were was this cord stuff. So this is a tubular material. It's like a chenille, like a velvety chenille, but it's hollow in the middle. What I did then is I tied this here at the back, kind of pushed it over the hook after tying in some tail fibers. This is kind of like a Carry Special kind of fly you're looking at here. So some flash in the tail, some foam that's wrapped on the hook on the underside, Then I pulled this tubing over the foam, and then I put some more flash here at the head, and I wrapped a pheasant hackle for extra kind of legginess and movement. So the idea is to end up with some kind of very special type fly that's also floating because of the foam that's built in there underneath. So if you have any foam that is a bad color for anything else, that would be a good candidate to go underneath there. Okay, so these are the two flies that I had in mind, and what I'm going to tie is this. There may be time to do both. We'll see. I'm going to do the backswimmer / water boatman fly first, and there I'm going to use red thread. And the idea of using red thread is that these bugs have actually red eyes, and the fish look very closely at those red eyes. No red eyes, they're not going to take. The red eyes, they'll go crazy. So that's all there is to it. Okay, the nice, interesting idea that I really like about Dick's backswimmer is that he uses a little bit of flash, angel hair, or whatever you happen to have. So I have some of this flashable, like it's very fine. So I think the important thing here is to get something fine. And I think what that does, by putting that at the tail, Crinix is the other stuff that it comes out in pearl like this, and it's quite fine. And I think what that does is it creates a bit of an illusion of a bubble trail behind the bug. Okay, and in this case, it's legitimate to call it a bug because these are, for biologists at least, these are the only true bugs that we fish with. So we call the other things bugs, but these are, even for entomologists, these are also bugs. The other ones are not. Okay, this is obviously too long. I used a little bit too much material here, so just trim the tail and trim this excess as well. Okay, now I'm going to add the rest of the materials in reverse, starting with the shellback, which is the shiny stuff. Of course, this is a lovely material that at the right angle becomes invisible. So that can be a little bit of a challenge here. So just a little bit of a angle at the tying point for the strip to make it easier to tie in. And this particular strip I probably could have trimmed a little more to make it a little narrower. Just go here to the back. And then I'm going to take a piece of the colorful foam and again make sure that I put it on with the color. So when I tie it in with the color facing down, because this is going to be folded back. You want to compress this foam reasonably well. And then finally, a piece of tan foam. And again, at the tying point, so that you don't create an enormous amount of bulk here, cut a bit of an angle so that you can compress this nicely on the hook. Okay, then move the thread forward and leave some room for the head. Then just wrap the foam, make sure you don't cut the foam on the point of the hook. A few turns, depending on how wide you, ideally you wouldn't be cutting this too wide because then it's too few turns and it comes out kind of odd shaped. So if you want a smoother body, it's better to err on the side of narrow rather than on the sides of thick. So this one's about, I don't know, 3.5 millimeters wide or so, not very wide. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, I think some people like to tie the legs on at the end. I found that it works pretty well if I tie the legs on at this stage. So I'm going to try to put on the legs at this point. Okay, so this is still kind of version 1.0. I may change my mind in the future if I find a better way of doing this. To attach this one end, do 3 wraps or so, then cut this to a length where if I need to cut more, I can always come back. Then turn the other side. Put it on. First time, if you want to just position it, you know, you can do one, or in fact, this material will let you reposition it even after a couple of turns of thread. So there is enough wiggle there. You just look that things are reasonably symmetric. If you're happy with it, just hold them in place. And let's see, are they still in place? Yeah. Okay. What's going to happen next, though, is when I pull the foam forward, that is going to secure this these legs in place pretty well, actually. So I'm going to cut these extras. I tried one where I I left, you know, some front legs as well that might make it more attractive to fish. I have no idea. It just didn't look right to me, so the next version I did it without. Okay, now I'm gonna trim these to be equal. They're reasonably so. And now fold the foam. So pull on the foam a little bit so it does stretch somewhat. Not too hard because you risk breaking it. And then secure with a thread. And here I'm going to use a fair amount of thread to get a little bit of a red hot spot of the fly. And then I'm going to pull, and this is not very stretchy, so that's why I'm thinking that the next strip of this I'm going to cut is going to be a little narrower. But again, pull tightly on it. It's really tough material. Pull nice and tight and do a few thread wraps here. Secure it well and start building that little red hot spot. Okay. Almost there. I'm just going to pull this back a little and trim. And then I'm going to cut this, leave maybe a little bit of a stub for the head. And the thread here underneath. Double check. I have the red is visible from below. It's not very visible from above. I can tinker with this foam a little bit to improve on that if I want. And for the whip finish, I can finish in either place. I'm just gonna finish right here on top of the foam. That's it. It's a little boatman back swimmer kind of fly. Like I said, I really wanted to try. Dick gave me some of his flies tied by him, so I have some, and I'm gonna try those as well. They look quite different. And first of all, they're much bigger. Here I felt that the tail was a little too long. So then I just thought of trying using those ideas. Now I do have 15 minutes left, so maybe I'm going to try to show you one of those green flies. Let's see how that may look like. So now I have a hook. Let's tell you what hook this is. It looks like a extra long sort of nymph hook, and I would venture to guess it's a size 10 as well, looking at the size of the gap of the hook. But these are just guesses. I don't know. I just had 3 hooks lying about, and I was experimenting. But if I were to tie this, I would go maybe size 8 long, size 10 long hook, like 9672, or some of you might like something even longer than that. Okay. So I'm going to move the thread at the back, and I'm going to take some of the flash material, which is this polar flash. I'm just going to get, again, this is very nice and soft, and it has, the flash is also combined with a little bit of thread or something. So it's got this sort of limpness you get out of the cryonic material, the flash in a tube or whatever it's being sold under. So what I like to do in order to get a little bit more bulk in my tail, I take a few strands and I double it up. And I do that, you know, if I want a sparser tail, I just double up once. If I want a little bit more bulk, I just go with one more time. To me, that's a matter of personal preference more than anything else. Okay, so it's a bit, what I'm doing here is a bit wasteful. Normally, I'd be a little more. Okay, there's a better way of doing this, which is slip this whole thing over the hook. If you can. And the thread, catch the thing, and just wrap over the top of it. Like that. There you go. This is not going anywhere, not that the alternative fails. So, you know, tail, there's still a bundle here. And if I'm going to tie another one, what I'm going to do is I use one of these little bulldog clips, super handy tool. And slide this in. This is magic tool before Petit Jean came along. Okay, now for this is the only difficult part with this fly. So I've tried different things, we'll see. What I've done here already is I cut the tube a little bit at somewhat of an angle, and then I gave it a little bit of heat to melt it down. But before I go and get carried away with this, I need some foam. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, these are some scraps actually that I had left from retrimming a little bit that the foam that I was using in the boatman. So I'm just gonna attach this here. And I'm going to try to do some wrapping. And the challenge will be to not get it too bulky, because then it'll be difficult to slip on the tube. Let's see if this is going to do the trick. Just secure. Cut. Untwist my thread a little bit so it doesn't cut too much into the foam. I want to keep the foam here for warranty purposes, and move the thread back. Okay. Now I'm going to have to pre-cut this, because otherwise cutting it afterwards is going to be very, very messy. So I think that's about the right length, and I'm just going to trim it here. Now for the fun stuff, I'm going to push this. See if I didn't over melt that end. I'm going to push this guy. If this doesn't work, I'll just cut another piece. It's no big. So here it goes. I have a piece of tubing now over the top of this. And I find that this is the only difficult part of the whole tying process, because this tubing and the angles I'm trying to work with it, it's fairly slippery. So I hold it here, my right hand, and try to pinch this down. And of course, you're kind of doing this blindly because you've got the foam underneath, and you just have to remember where you stopped. Okay, so I'm going to call this, for safety purposes, some of you may be inclined to bring out the super glue. That's okay. This is not a fancy fly. And I'm not going to take the thread over the body, so I'm going to whip finish here. And having one of these long reach whip finishers does come in handy, believe me. If you're very good, you can finger whip finish there. The problem here is, as you can see, this is not perfectly secure. It's still rotating a little bit. Got a little too much material down there, and the nature of this fabric is it's synthetic stuff. It's quite slippery. So that's why I'm saying that, glue, although I generally try to avoid using it, might not be a bad idea in this place. Okay, now reattach the thread at the front. And pull this thing nice and tight. And I should have probably given myself a little bit more material to work with here. I'm gonna have to go back and push down on it and do a few dirty tricks here to just get this secure in place. There we go. I think that's good enough. Oh, now it's your choice of legs and finishing at this point, really. You can do whatever you feel like doing. So I'm going to do this kind of flashy finish, I guess. I can probably use what's left here of my the flash that I use for the tail. So I'm gonna try to put it on top here. Sure. course, this is all the wrong way, but what I'm hoping for is that I can actually split this in half and do half on one side and the other half on the other side. So there we go. Here's half on one side, and there's the other half on the other side. I'm going to pull this back and give it a few more turns of thread. It seems that I did get something, maybe not perfect. Down here and here. This one here on this. The side facing you is looking okay. The side facing me, not so well. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull it down a little and do a bit of, give it a bit of on top. Okay, this was just a kind of a me being cheap, really, because normally you take enough material, you put one side at a time, and you get something that looks decent. But okay. Now these things are a bit long. I don't want them to go much beyond the tail. I'm just gonna bring them even with the tail, and then any extra evening is gonna be done by the pheasant. So now I'm gonna get some pheasant. This might actually be a fly that already works. So I'm gonna get some pheasant here. Maybe this one. I'm to try to strip the fluff without breaking the feather. It's this stem, sometimes when you're stripping the fluff, you also peel off some of the stem, and then what is left at the end of this can be, see, this is happening here on this side, can be a little bit too fragile. Well, let's hope that didn't. Okay, and what I'm going to do, again, this is an example of soft hackle. So very similar to what Dave was doing earlier, similar ideas. So what I do is I just push this back, and I should have brought some water with me here because that always helps. So here it's all folded back, and I'm going to wrap this way. And so what I like to do is I like to tie it on by the tip and pull a bit back so I have a little bit of starting room. I don't know if you can see what I've done. It worked for me in the past pretty well. Secure this nicely. It's no longer moving. Okay, that's good. Move the thread forward. Now, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to put a knot here because I'm going to be manipulating this feather a fair bit, and I don't want things to slip. I'm just going to get my fingers a little wet and fold the hackle back. And here the only challenge is I'm wrapping over pretty thick. I kind of did a few too many turns of thread there, and I have a bit too much bulk. This works a lot better if you have less. You know, the closer you are to the bare hook, the better your hackle wrapping is going to work. If you're new to doing this sort of thing, what you may want to do is say, this is just twisting on me in a bad way. What's happening when these things are twisting is you end up with fibers pointing forward. And the whole purpose of this exercise of folding hackles is to avoid fibers pointing forward. And one good way to obviously avoid that is to be very nice and tidy when it comes to doing the head of your fly. When you're ramping down and you're wrapping down a cone essentially, you're not going to get neat hackle easily. It's going to be very hard. So see what I've basically done here is I've moved all the way to just behind the eye where I have luckily enough space that I can do a few wraps of hackle. So there, secure this very nicely with 2 or 3 turns of thread. If you want to super lock it in, fold the stem back and do another 2 or 3 turns of thread. And then only, whoops, see, this is exactly what you want. To be careful that doesn't happen to you. I'm going to do more than that. And then I'm just going to pull the stem off and break it rather than messing around with scissors. Now I can do a few more turns here to tidy up and push this hackle fibers back. Take the whip finisher. 3 or 4 turns. There's 1 knot. And if you don't like to put goo on your flies, do a second whip finish here and just leave it well alone. There is your dollar store almost carry special. I haven't tossed this in a glass of water yet to see if it floats, but I think I put enough foam there. And the idea with both of these flies with the foam underbodies is that you can fish them on a sinking line, and they'll be standing up above the weeds and in all of those places where the fish are hungry and looking for flies.
Looks good,
That is
Florin.
that.
Good job.
Florin, would you mind posting a materials list?
No,
If you wouldn't mind.
I was, like I said, this is a little bit experimental at this stage. So, Dave, can you stop the recording?
Yep, I'll do that. Just give me 2 secs. Oops, here, let's get